Can I be real?
Please, come on, please.
It feels a little discouraging at times when I see pastors falling away. And the thought that comes to my mind is, Lord, what would it take for me to walk away from you?
All right, friends, we are several weeks into the Revelation series, and I really love these roundtables. They've been such fun discussions. And something Pastor Johnson said, he said this last week, he brought it up again this week, how this is almost like these couple of letters to the church as like a spiritual boot camp. Jesus getting us ready for what's next. And man, it really rung true for me this week, especially when you consider how most people who go through boot camp absolutely don't like it because it's like you're really going through a difficult time, right? Now, when I'm talking to friends who have been through boot camp, they're so grateful they go through it. It really prepares them for their life, what it looks like afterwards. But somebody posted something on Instagram and tagged Victory this past week about how, wow, man, last week we really learned about Jezebel. This week is another admonishment. And when you think about these past couple of weeks, it's been admonishing and some correction and growth, or as theologians call it, marriage, right? Isn't that kind of how what it's like as another married man? A lot of training, instruction. My wife's going to watch this. I might need to do some preemptive apology.
Some post, do it in post,
That's right. We'll edit it later. So it's that time where the Lord is cleaning us up. He's getting us ready for what's next. But when you think about how it's not just been 1 week of it, there's been a lot of the Lord cleaning us up and getting us ready, which I know he's preparing us. I know he's getting us ready for what it looks like in the future. But what's something that we can do? Because if you go through correction for 1 week, it's still not easy. Just like what Hebrews tells us, like correction is not easy to go through, even though it produces a harvest. What's something that we can do as the Lord is getting us ready week after week to keep our spirits up in the middle of this pruning process? Because pruning processes are hard. So Jerry, what's something that you do to help kind of keep your spirits up when you're going through this kind of pruning season?
Well, Stephen, I love the fact that, for example, as we're approaching these letters, it's getting us healthy spiritually to prepare us. And one of the things that I love to focus is not only the admonitions and the corrections, but also the promises, because I see that with every church, every letter that God is writing to those churches, there's a promise. And for me, I'm more motivated by the blessings. So, for example, that, we get to eat of the tree of the fruit of life, the tree of life, the crowns of life. And then also with this church of Sardis that we just learned with the right garments and our names even being in the book of life. So that actually is in the forefront for me, being like, almost like when you go through boot camp, that it's painful, but on the other side, there's such a reward. So that's what helps me.
That's great. Yeah, when you think about someone when they go through boot camp, if you've ever seen, I remember when my brother went through it, the emotions that he had when it was over, being able to wear that uniform, being able to wear that garment meant so much to him that it was worth going through whatever trials it was that they had to endure.
Absolutely.
All right, what else? What's something that you guys would say helps you keep your spirits up during times of pruning, during times where the Lord is doing some work in our hearts?
I think a lot of times in the world, we can feel like we're on the losing side with culture, with different things going on in the world. It can feel like following Jesus, like really following Jesus can feel like, man, you're doing it alone. We have church, we have other things, but man, just the reminder that Jesus has already won. Jesus already won the battle. And what he's doing is he's preparing in Revelation, he's preparing those churches, but in turn through his word for us, he's preparing us for the coming days as it leads up to the end times, or as it leads up to, man, finally what is the final victory, and is us being able to, of everything being complete, of us being in eternity with God forever. And so for me, it's just reminding that on the scoreboard, Jesus already won. And so though pruning is hard, change is hard, but the word is always, through refinement, I think of refining gold. This is real quick, but refining gold is, in order to get impurities out of the gold, you have to heat it up. It has to get really hot. It's uncomfortable when it comes to the top. Then you can scoop those things out. And so when you're in a season of refinement, then when it cools off, then you have something that's pure. And so every time you go through a season of this, it means that God has something for you to do, a mission. There's something that requires that level of refinement on the other side of it. And so though Jesus has the victory, he still has assignments for us to live out. And I know it's a long answer for that, but that just reminds me is that Jesus has won and we have victory. And so I don't have to, when things are hard, I just keep reminding myself of the end of, man, it's worth it.
That's really good, especially considering like the whole point of us reading this book is reminding us that Jesus has won.
Yes.
And we know what the end of the story looks like, right? The ring does get dropped into Mount Doom and we win. We win in the end. So that's a great reminder. Good stuff.
Mm-hmm. For me, I'm really encouraged by my community. When I look to the right and left of me and there are people that are following Christ, I'm like, y'all are doing it. And I feel like I have a place to go to lean into. Here's what I'm struggling with. Here's what I need prayer in. And I'm watching people surrender to God. I'm watching people, die to themselves. And that encourages me to keep going as well, along with he's already won and look at the promises we have. But that feeling of I feel alone can be so real. But for me, being a part of godly community has been so encouraging because there are moments where I've wanted to give in, give up. But there have been people that have encouraged me to come on, Lana, keep fighting, keep pushing. So, yeah.
All right, you stole my answer with that one because
my
that's.
bad.
I mean, the Lord spoke through you too, is what I meant to say. Because I feel like for me, it makes me think about whenever I watch a bad movie. Have you ever watched like a horrible movie before where you're wondering why this is the worst thing that I've ever seen? Horrible acting, directing, writing, whatever. But if I'm watching a bad movie with a friend beside me, it makes it so much more enjoyable because it's that shared experience. We might even make jokes about it as we're going along the way. And having friends alongside me that are able to identify with the same season that I'm walking through totally transforms what my experience is. Like I get it, right? When it's not good for somebody to be alone. Because when you have that camaraderie, that companionship, that person who goes, yeah, me too, that really does make a big difference for what we're experiencing.
Yeah.
Good answer.
I'll even add, Stephen, that, when you read a good book and you want to go to the back of the book, you want to know who is the hero, who wins, right? And I love the fact that Jesus Christ is the victor. And so it gives you so much peace when you're reading these letters. There's nothing to be afraid, but to be encouraged because at the end, Jesus wins. So if we're with Jesus, we win.
That's right. No matter what happens between now and then, we know that we win and that we are overcomers.
Yes.
All right. One of the things Pastor Johnson talked about that was, man, this caused me to like pause for a moment as well, was when he mentioned about how one of the critiques of Sardis is they did a great job on appearances. Like I'm sure if they had socials, they would look like they were doing everything right. They would have recorded all their devotions in the morning, had great things that they shared. Everything would have been perfect. But when Jesus says, not just that, hey, there's a sickness, but when he says on the inside, you're dead, that causes me to pause. And then Pastor Johnson talked about how there's a city in the U.S. that has had over 7 very well-known pastors who were on traveling circuits, would be like the perfect example of someone that you would go, they have got it together, that had big falls. And I think that when we hear news stories like that, not often do we get together as believers and do what Pastor Johnson said, not to point fingers or to judge, but to pause and say, okay, but by the grace of God, go I. We're not looking to judge anybody, but just can you process for a moment, what is it like as someone, like we all have our titles stripped away just for a moment, just talking as people. What is it like when you see so much what looks to be godly correction happening all across the church right now? What does that stir up inside of you? what goes through your mind? Not as someone who goes to Victory or as someone who's a part of the big church, but just personally, what is it like when you see so much of what Jesus talked about in Sardis happening all over in churches, especially in the U.S.?
I think it just exposes the reality because Jesus already knew they were dead. So they have an appearance that they are alive and they're doing great things. But on the inside, Jesus, through all the churches, he says, I know, through every single church, but especially this one that says like, hey, I'm alive, I'm doing all these great things. And so just kind of, it's sovereign. It brings a reality of the fear and the love of God at the same time. Again, not to walk pridefully, but to walk in humility before the Lord. Says, it's by your grace, God, and keep us in your will so that we don't fall. And we don't judge them. My heart breaks for those churches. But at the same time, I know that it's for our good. And so I'm glad that it's getting exposed because we want the people that are there to actually find Jesus and not a counterfeit.
Yeah, it's good to remember that he really does take every circumstance and use it for good.
Absolutely.
And when we pray for him to clean up the church and he then begins to do that, we shouldn't be so surprised when he's when he's answering our prayers.
Yeah. For a long time, one of the hardest scriptures for me to read is when Jesus says, some will come to me one day and say, I did these things in your name, but depart from me, I never knew you. And so almost saying to the church of Sardis, like, you're doing all this in my name. And I know Pastor Johnson went as far as to say, like, they were kind of like the representation of like a church without substance. Like people come against you when you're standing up firm for something. He gave the example of that church being like the ultimate church. It's just letting anything go. Like you can do anything if all. There are no hard lines. There's no sin. There's no reality to holiness. There's no reality to living righteously. But then to say that we have it all together on the outside, but internally we don't really have a relationship with God. And so for me, if I take away job, title, everything else out of the way, just me as a follower of Jesus, it makes me put a mirror up at myself and ask, okay, how much of what I do is because of a job or because of church or because of other people? And how much is it because I truly have a relationship with Jesus? Because if you take all of it away, do I still have a relationship with Jesus? And asking yourself that. And I have to ask myself that. That's something that I do my best to ask myself that regularly. But when I was listening to that sermon this weekend, it just was a reminder of, man, above all else, Jesus in Matthew 26, man, above all else, seek first the kingdom of heaven and everything else will be added onto you. It's so easy to get caught up in everything we have to do and our families and all the things going around us that we can put quiet time, we can put devotional time, we can put these things on the back burner. But in reality, carving out that time is the most valuable time that we have. And that's the biggest reminder for me.
For me, can I be real?
Please, come on, please.
It feels a little discouraging at times when I see pastors falling away. And the thought that comes to my mind is, Lord, what would it take for me to walk away from you? And could you reveal that to me? Because I don't want to. I think that, I don't know, I'm newer in my faith, I think. I've been walking with the Lord for about 10 years. So, there are people that have been doing it a lot longer. And I'm like, God, is there anything? Because I know I don't want to. I don't want to get to that point, but it's scary for me. But then I look at people that have been walking with the Lord for 30, 40, 50 years. I'm in a grow group right now, and the leader is 69. About to be 70. And when she talks about God, she still tears up. And I get so encouraged on the back end, like, man, look at the Lord keeping her. Look at how in love she still is with God. So I'm leaning into those moments, like, show me what you've learned about him. I want to know more about how God has kept you. What about him has kept you close to him? Because I want to stay close. But yeah, sometimes it can be a little discouraging, like, man, they're getting taken out. But it's also encouraging to see other people. So community, big deal.
Agreed. And I'm glad you said that because it's when you've read these people's books, when you've listened to their music, when they've had an influence on your life, then it is a punch in the gut. I can remember for one of them, one of these pastors where things began to come out. That night, it was hard to go to sleep because one, I was grieving for the church and what they were going to be going through. But there was that sense of, all right, Lord, but I feel like it might have been, and hopefully I think this is good for us to remember. I love what you said, a fear of the Lord. Like, man, I don't want to do that to Jesus. I don't want to bring shame to his name. I want to make sure I'm living in a way where my kids later on can say how dad acted up there was how he acted down here. And the thought of seeing someone who, like your grow group leader, I love the thought of someone who has been walking with the Lord for a while and is still in love with him. Kind of like when you see a couple in their 80s walking in the mall and then they hold hands and you go, that's great. They still love each other. God, that's wonderful. They've been stuck together for 50 years, but man, they are still passionately in love with each other. Stuck was used very loosely there in case I'm addressing any comments that I know are going to show up preemptively. But I want that with Jesus. I want to make sure that the passion for him does not wane or that it gets to be dead. All right, so last question. Because Jesus said to them several times, wake up, and I want you to be able to strengthen what remains. But I'll say very, very rarely, I think, would we say that our relationship with God is always on that like straight up. I think, any relationship has its ups and downs where the Lord has to step in or where things happen where you have to get passionate, like remind yourself of what the Lord has done, and where you begin to stir up the things. Pastor Johnson called it the CPR, where you can remind yourself of your calling. You can have a chance to get back in prayer. You look at how you're handling your resources. So there's some things that we can do to help stir the passion up again, right? So all of us have had seasons like that. What's something that you do when you feel like your passion has waned and God is gracious and kind enough to say to you, all right, strengthen what's there, pursue me again. What's something that you do to begin to ramp up your relationship with God again?
I'll say, for example, I was thinking about King David, in the book of Psalms. He's a man after God's own heart. And when you read the Psalms so far, sometimes he feels so far away from God. And oftentimes he feels so close with God. And I love that about it because it shows a humanity, right? Like we can feel sometimes so close to God, and oftentimes we don't feel his presence, yet he's still there. He still loves us. And the areas in this church when I feel like, when he says, wake up, that little that remains, there are areas in my life when I feel like they're dead. And even as a pastor, whether areas in my calling that oftentimes I say, oh, that's not going to happen. And you allow the lies of the enemy to come in and over trump the truths of God. And this is an invitation, CPR, like wake up, like, no, I have callings for you. Be bold, take courageous risk. I'm with you. You can do that. And even with prayer, oftentimes, even as a pastor, I know I need to pray every day because I need to, but I just don't, my flesh doesn't want to do it. And that's the area where it's dead. And so when I feel like I'm more carnal, more worldly, I have to check myself and be like, you know what? I need to spend time in prayer. I need to seek the Lord. In this season, I just got to dive in prayer. And when I do, my wife can tell me, hey, man, you're more loving, more caring, more joyful. And that is true. When I feel like I get intimate with God, I feel like the better Jerry version that is. And so I can give more to everybody, my kids, my family, my ministry. And so, but yeah, there's dead areas, even in resources. Oftentimes you're like, I'm always giving. Maybe this time I don't give. And that's a lie of the enemy because, it all belongs to God. Is God giving you an opportunity to be generous, to increase? Because on the other side, there's blessings. So in all areas, CPR, the calling, the prayer, as well as the resources, I feel like I got to check myself and say, God, wake me up. Wake me up. So I'm walking in your calling. I'm doing the things you call me to do, not trying to measure to somebody else, but like literally stepping into the blessing that you have for me. And then through prayer, being able to seek your face so I don't miss a step. So I feel like that, yeah, that was for me, that this message was good. There's a lot of areas that I feel I believe the lies, but God is exposing that in this series so that I can start believing again too. So, yeah.
I think that's important to believe again, because the enemy loves to get our passion to go down with those lies, right? With those things he likes to whisper into us, and reminding ourselves of what God has said to us before. That can stir us up, right? That's really good.
For me, I'm going first this time.
Okay.
For me, I feel like it was so convicting. I mean, every part of that CPR, I felt like God was like opening my heart and showing me like I was in a coma, if I can keep it real. I mean, when it comes to my calling, I feel like there are things the Lord had been telling me, Mana, I've called you to it. And I've been really lax on it. Like, okay, God, but how, when, and not having a sense of urgency like I felt he was calling me to have. So I just felt full conviction in that area with prayer. I felt like in some areas of my life, like, what is prayer really going to do? Like, I've been praying about this for such a long time and feeling discouraged about it. But the Lord was showing me, like, no, keep praying. And even when Pastor Johnson talked about, like, the angel fighting on our behalf, I think that was
great.
so cool for me because, yeah, the spiritual realm is so real. And prayer really does activate that for us. So I felt convicted there. And the resources, like, what are you doing with your time, with your money? How are you giving into the kingdom of God? Yeah, it was a complete discipline moment for me, and I'm grateful for it. And I left like, okay, let's get back to prayer. Let's get back to what you're calling me to do. I don't have time to waste. So I'm really glad. Honestly, I've avoided the book of Revelation. Y'all, like, I'm a church kid. I grew up in church, but I grew up in like the Left Behind era.
Yeah, same.
Oh, man.
So
Same.
it terrified me. I was like, I'm not going back there. No, like, I know I want my name to be written in the Lamb's Book of Life, but I felt so overwhelmed approaching Revelation, and I just did not. So I'm grateful that we're going through it now and that I get to see the encouragement and the hope that God wrote out for me. So, yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of what Romans 2:4 says, how it's his kindness that causes life change in us. It's not like we have that old kind of idea of a preacher that is just condemning. That's not what it's felt like. It's felt like God's kindness working in our hearts, getting us ready, which is kind of like what a drill sergeant does during boot camp. I mean, that really is a kindness to help prepare people for what's next. Might not always feel like it in the moment, but thank God for that loving kindness that's saying, hey, there is something I've called you to that's even bigger than what you might remember right now. Let's get back to it. That is such a good grace that God has shown us.
Yeah, when I think about being in a place that's dry or like my relationship with the Lord feels like it's the passion is waned, like one thing that Pastor Johnson said yesterday that really punched me in the gut is he said like the people of Sardis were like, they were lullabied to sleep by their own strength. And I think for me, the biggest enemy to my relationship with God and my spiritual life is my own works. Or like if I feel like I'm doing well or things are going well or things are happening, or I feel like I'm on top of it, because then it begins to shift from my life is dependent on God to my life is dependent on me. And for me, that's the place where I found myself multiple times where I'm like, God, I don't feel you anymore. And there's almost like a gentle whisper of like, because you're doing your own thing right now. And it may not always feel like super sinful. Like I'm not drinking. I'm not doing these other things that are, people would say are outright, sinful from the outer appearance. But for me to take my own life into my own hands on a regular basis, and we all do, we all become reliant on ourselves. But what I'm trying to say is that there are those times where I just go on autopilot and I try to handle things on my own. I try to solve things on my own. But I love that the fruits of the Spirit, it's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gratefulness, self-control. All those things are fruits of the Spirit. They're not the fruits of Zach, not the fruits of Lana or Jerry or Steven. They're the fruits of the Spirit. Like our source is from the Lord. So the long way of answering is, when I feel dry, when I'm in that place, it's reminding myself that I have to look at my life. And, he gave us the CPR, the areas of prayer and resources, and these other areas where we could be asleep. But I have to ask myself, where am I asleep? And when I'm asleep, it looks like, where are the areas that I've taken control? Where are the areas of my life where I'm trying to steer the ship? Where are the areas of my life where I'm trying to do the work on my own? And how do I bring those back under God? And how do I bring that back to Him? How do I resurrender that to Him? And that's where I feel like I get off track, and I have to bring myself back and say, it's not about me. I can't do it on my own. I can't be the best husband, father, pastor, friend. I can't do all that on my own. I need the Holy Spirit. I need Jesus. And when I get off track is when I feel that dryness. But when I begin to give that back to Him and surrender that to Him and seek Him in all those things, that's when I feel like that starts to come back to life for me.
That's really good. I had forgotten that Pastor Johnson talked about how their strength had lullabied them to sleep. That is such a unique analogy, isn't it? Okay, so it reminds me of that quote, how victory has defeated you. Do you remember that from?
Yes, from Endgame.
I thought it was from Batman. Remember Bane said it? I don't want to get too nerdy out on here.
The Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, there you go.
Bane did say your victory is defeated.
That's right, and that kind of reminds me of my son right now is doing cross country, and he's doing great. He's a junior. He's running the fastest on his team right now, which I love to see. But I'm also like, I like it when he has somebody who's faster than him, because it kind of spurs him to want to.
Competition makes you better,
doesn't it? So when you're winning and you have this victory mindset, like, oh, okay, cool, I can relax a little bit. I can not maybe be as passionate as I was before because I've made it. But I think that, with our relationship with God, but also with people, it reminds me of what you hit even at the very beginning, being in a good community. How we provoke one another towards righteousness. And whenever, like, I was recently hiking on a trail with a friend of mine, and I asked the person in front of me, like, hey, what you thinking about? And he said, oh, I'm just praying in the Spirit right now. And I was like, oh, yeah. Yeah, me too. Me too.
I'm not thinking about lunch right now at all.
Yeah, I'm not hungry or wondering how much longer we got to camp in the slightest. But I'm so glad I have people like that in my life that spur me to do good works, so that when my passion starts to go, starts to drain a little bit, because that's normal. That's just, we live in fallen bodies. We live in a fallen world, but we need things in our life to help spur us to good works. And a good community, man, it can do that. People that are encouraging you in that kind of manner is such a big deal. That's something that definitely helps me make sure that I'm trying my best to move forward when I start to get complacent. You guys were so open and honest during this time. Thank you so much for what you guys shared. I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
I had a blast.
It's awesome being here.
Yeah, it was fun.